Thank you very much for the opportunity to be on stage here to address you all. Show of hands, how many people are here for the very first time at a UBBA summit? All right. Thank you. How many people, this is your second? Awesome. How many people have been here for 3 years in a row? Excellent. All right, now we've all stretched. We've gotten our morning stretch in. You know, UBBA, I'm very proud that Ericsson's been a part of it from the get-go. Beginning 3 years ago, PLTE was really, you know, why are we doing it? Is it viable? The summit and Plugfest the first year was all about connectivity. Could we connect a core and a RAN, and could we prove out that this is actually a viable option? The second year was about putting devices on the network. It was about MCPTT, mutual aid, topics such as that. So it was really about now that we have a network, what are we going to do with it? It was about use cases. So it started to build the story. And anybody who knows me, it's all about the story. So now here we are, year 3. And it's about things like failover and roaming and the important topics. The rubber's really starting to hit the road now. We've got a lot of early adopters who have put their time, energy, and thought leadership, and that's really what UBBA is all about, is sharing those best practices, sharing the skin knees from the people who go first for the benefit of those who come a little bit later in the game. The trends in the industry now are really starting to turn to proving out the value. It's one thing to build a network, all the hurdles you have to go through in order to address regulators and get the approvals and get the rate cases approved. But then, now what? How do we actually prove out the value? And I'm shocked that I'm not even using my cue cards right now. So I guess I'm on a roll. So now it really becomes a matter of how does this network prove its value, not only to the utility, but also to your communities. And we've heard a bit about bridging the digital divide. We've heard about what does it mean for the utilities, bringing your stakeholders, your internal stakeholders on board to actually show what the technology can do. I think really some of the next topics that we're going to be addressing, I don't know who here knows, but I just heard that October is National Cybersecurity Month. So that sounds silly talking to this audience, because cybersecurity is an everyday endeavor. It is not a monthly, you know, one month a year endeavor. So I think the topic of security is going to be at the forefront of everything we do as we roll out these networks. In addition to that, it's proving out the use cases for things that really matter to your utilities. It's DER. It's you know, back to security related. It's about reliability. So as we move forward, I think the biggest trend is going to be in artificial intelligence. Taking all the massive amounts of data that you're collecting from all the devices that you're putting on the network, it's almost like it's a renaissance, not to make a pun of where we're located right now, but it truly is a renaissance time period in our lives where we're collecting massive amounts of data. How do we rely on that data to give us good, actionable opportunities? What are the risks of having that much data? What are the staff needs to address the massive amounts of data that we have? Do you need now data scientists in addition to your engineers that you're gearing up with, and your PLTE engineers, your 5G. So it's creating new opportunities. It's creating new ways of decision making, and I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty excited about the future. Show of hands. Yeah, there you go. So, Bobby, am I going to bring the panelists up now, or are we? Okay. I'd like to invite to the stage now. I do want to make sure I don't mess this up. No more riffing, freewheeling. I'd like to invite Charles King, Senior VP and CTO of Evergy, to the stage. There he is. Hi, Charles. Thank you for joining. Jimi Conway, Senior Manager of React's Energy Strategy at ComEd. Oh, yes. Sorry. Get out of your way. Patrick Nolan, Enterprise Architect, Senior Advisor, Southern Cal Edison. Thank you for joining. Good morning. Ian Troughton, CEO of 4RF. All righty. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining. So the topic of this panel is balancing digital innovation with technical investments. So the way that I really view this is, this gets back to proving the value. What are we investing in these networks, and then what is the return? What's the value? So I'd like to start out. This is a question for all of you. What do you see as the trends in innovation in general, and how does that apply to the work that you're doing? We can just go down the panel. Ian?
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah, so I think one thing I really like about this forum is it brings together a mix of people that are sort of deeply entrenched in trying to solve problems, but also people that need to know that problems are solvable. And I think that combination is really fruitful. I would say, consistent feedback we've had in terms of trends is how to make deployment of large networks easier, right? I think there is a complexity involved here. And so what we've really done is taken a fresh look at how to make that mass configuration much simpler, and I think that is a key, a really key driver for getting these networks done.
Good morning. I think I would come at that question from an overarching kind of an industry view and say it really is an enabler to our overall model for digitization. From the historical viewpoint, utilities haven't necessarily been viewed as the most technologically progressive industry model, right? We're a conservative, dependable, reliable industry that hasn't necessarily been on the forefront of technology. But the need to pivot and change that, has become clear much more recently, right? And I think the efforts of this group, private broadband, are really foundational as an enabler as we go forward to creating our own view and mode of digitization as an industry. And certainly we're looking at that way as a company from an Evergy perspective as we go forward, certainly from an operational standpoint.
Yeah, I think for us, at ComEd, I think when we think about innovation, especially when it comes to advanced communications, is allowing the grid and our investments to do more with less. And so to that point, you think about the low-hanging fruit of use cases that communications can provide and system visibility can provide, like offsetting a truck roll, making better informed data-driven decisions for preventative maintenance. These are things that I hope is not lost on this audience, right? This is, it's like, okay, that makes sense. That's stuff we talk about every day, but we're getting pushed more and more to really figure out what can we do. So I think for us, that's been a really big theme.
I think you're going to start to see a lot more innovation from your equipment vendors. So where they currently have a situation where if they want to add some intelligence into their equipment, they pretty much have to solve the entire solution, the entire communication system back to whatever servers are collecting. And that's somewhat of a large hindrance for a company that they make this widget. Now they have to come up with an entire solution to communicate back and forth to that widget. That's kind of a hindrance to doing that kind of innovative development. But I look at it like Wi-Fi. So, I have an LG fridge, and that LG fridge is a smart fridge. I guarantee you no one at LG knows anything about Wi-Fi. They just slapped a Wi-Fi card into the fridge, and then they started asking the question, well, what do we want this fridge to tell us? Well, anything you want. Count how many times the doors open. Count, I have these awesome ice balls that it makes. I love it. Count how long does it take to make the ice balls. Count, is the temperature climbing too high? Is it having to work too hard? All these things that when you don't have to worry about the communication platform, you can focus on being really good at making your widget and making your widget as smart as it can. So you're going to start to see a lot of innovation from the vendors, knowing that they don't have to worry about the entire communication system and develop that also.
Very interesting perspective, and I'm looking forward to having ice balls with the, with the refrigerator, smart fridge. So I think we touched upon it, and this is again to all panelists, but how do you see the investment in PLTE specifically being a clear opportunity for a more resilient and reliable network? And can we drill down a little bit? We kind of glossed, but can we get a little deeper into how it affects resiliency and reliability? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump back in. I touched digitization and the enablement that brings for our operations group, which really goes to the question, I think. So our near-term use cases are really largely around our automated distribution management initiative that we have within the company. And so situational awareness is kind of an overarching theme there that really helps to avoid customer outages, avoid truck rolls, and if not avoid it, minimize it, right? Which really begins to change the game in terms of the economics, the customer benefit, customer satisfaction, and then scaling that model as we go forward, right, is also key. So when we look at private LTE, again, near-term situational awareness in the distribution area, but then we're also looking at follow-on use cases that are similar in nature for our generation. As an independently owned, vertically integrated utility, multiple functions, the model can expand and scale. And so, the abilities and the benefits that are out there at this point seem almost limitless in terms of the work that we have to do and the urgency that is there. It's interesting to see the urgency now that the enablement factor is there of trying to figure out what is next from a priority perspective and then take advantage of that.
Yeah, so with ComEd and Exelon overall, we've been deploying communications for a long time, right? Just like everyone has. And I think traditionally it's been, hey, we need this deployment now. We have this use case or this thing that we're going to implement. And so we build, custom build that part of the network towards that. So for my team, around 2019, 2020, we started my group, REACT's team, which is the Renewable Energy Advanced Control and Telemetry Systems. It just rolls right off the tongue.
Right.
But
most acronyms do.
Yeah. Long story short, it's the grid side engineers that came together as the programmatic folks to then drive the programmatic deployment of the network. And so we started deploying even more and more fiber. We've got well over 2,500 miles of fiber now on the system. And so now to the point about PLTE, I think that that's a natural inclusion and evolution about what we're doing, right? So PLTE connected to our fiber and having those sites connected to our fiber to backhaul all of that data, to me, is just, they're like these, we've been kind of trying to settle in on a lot of different analogies. So I try to use it as a term, like it's an on-ramp to our network. But it not only does that, but it expands our network physically. So we can reach even more devices, we can do even more things, right? But ultimately it comes back to the use cases, right? So what a new use case is, can I not, wired cannot be for everything, right? So, excuse me. So you think about like line sensors and other sorts of these older wireless technologies that can be kind of consolidated into PLTE, saves a lot on the O&M expense of having a lot of different networks to manage and that sort of thing. So I think for us, those are like some really big key drivers.
I think about your poor NOC who have to be experts in 10, 15, 20 different disparate communication systems. Now, think of the number of devices you have out there, and think about the fact that in 10 years you can add a 0 to the quantity. You're going to have 10 times, 20 times, and then you're going to want more information out of, let's say, your AMI system, so there's even more data being fed through that mesh network. Are all those systems really scalable? Not really. And then picture a world where you have one communication system and your NOC techs are fabulous at handling one system that can grow, and it scales up because if you have capacity issues, you just add more sites. And they become very proficient at it. You have fewer self-inflicted issues operationally. It's lower cost because you're only maintaining and training and doing everything you do for one system instead of the 15 or 20 that you might have out there. That's the operational advantage, is in streamlining to one area of focus and being very good at it.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think where there's a great opportunity of private LTE is to really capture that standards dividend, right? Because you know that you've got that interoperability across multiple vendors. So, being able to deliver value for bill payers through being able to use the right tool in different circumstances, but knowing that that interoperability is there and the scalability can be delivered.
Great, thank you all. So this question is for the utility panelists here today. So what have you seen, or if your network's not deployed yet, what is the vision for the community benefits to be with PLTE aside from the utility benefits? And Jimmy, I know that this one kind of hits home with your REACTS program. Maybe we start with you.
Yeah, sure. In the state of Illinois, the state passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which as part of it includes some pretty incredible goals for the state to hit it's like 1 million EVs by 2030, something like a 50% reduction in carbon emissions, and this is like across the state, right? And so now we've been talking a lot internally about like what is ComEd's role in helping to support that? What is the grid's role in becoming foundational to those goals? And so we've, of course I'm saying this to a bunch of telecom folks, right? But the telecommunications aspect, the smart aspect of the grid is foundational to a lot of those goals to be enabled, right? You have to have the system visibility, to like what you're saying, to allow us to operate the grid efficiently and be ready to accommodate everyone coming home at 5:30 and plugging in, right? Or at a minimum to keep all these DERs online, right? There's all these incentives for folks to put rooftop solar, community wind, and those sorts of things. And so to the point about the community aspect, I think it's having the grid not become a roadblock or a barrier to entry for a lot of those goals to be enabled, I think is really just, it's fundamental, but it's like you can't lose sight of that. I think it's really, really key.
Thank you. Charles?
Yeah, a couple thoughts come to mind. So one, it's really hard to separate customers from community, kind of to your question, right? But you can think of a couple different aspects of it. From the customer side, DERs, connectedness, if you will, use that word quite a bit, behind the meter, right? This is all an ecosystem that, to me, is kind of converging as we go forward in terms of a business model, a model for our customers. They don't all have the same interest from a technology perspective, as LT was talking about earlier, right? We're in Kansas and Missouri, so we certainly have a real demographic that we have to keep in mind there. But we've got a converging business model for our customers and for us operationally. And then you know, down the road, you've got the potential of providing broadband types of services from a community perspective. You know, we've got some work to do there in our states from probably a legislative perspective to help open some doors, not to get too far into the weeds on that topic, but so it's pushing it out a little bit further. We've got some near-term use cases again that are front and center for us, but I think there's both customer and community to your question there.
A scalable communication system is a flexible communication system. So when distributed power generation through solar panels on people's houses, as the system gets more complex, you can focus on how do we handle supporting what's happening in terms of the developments of those kinds of solutions out there in the community, and you don't have to focus on the communication system that will transport the data back and forth. You just focus on the end solution, what's happening with it, what's the additional intelligence you need to add on the edge of your distribution grid so that you can take all that information in and support all those innovations that are going to be coming at you that you might not necessarily be the ones developing.
That's great. The legislative part of it, I think, is very, very interesting, and I think that could be a panel topic of its own. Certainly, I've read the public testimony from several of the utilities on this panel, and the thing that I gleaned through that was that it is not only the utility benefit, but it is the utilities customers that the PUCs are looking out for. So maybe a topic for next year. Ian, how does the availability of spectrum and the investment in PLTE affect the device side of the equation?
Well, I think there's a great diversity of spectrum that's available. I think utilities have many options to choose from. I think what I would probably say was that while there's a divergence on which spectrum to choose, I think almost every utility is going down the path of acquiring some private spectrum. What we're being asked is being able to accommodate the different types of spectrum that utilities have access to or have determined that they need to achieve their ends. So one thing that we've done is joined in a consortium led by Anterix with Sequence to support low and mid-band coverage, which is a topic that's being discussed this week. And I think that's the sort of way that we can give customers more flexibility to deploy over a wide degree of topologies and densities.
That's great. Thank you. You actually answered my next question, which was, what are some of the new demands that are being placed upon not only for RF but other device manufacturers as it relates to this next wave? So I don't know if you've got anything more to add.
Why don't we see what the panelists have to say, and I can chime in and add
Sure. What demands are you placing on your equipment and device vendors that either have not been realized yet, or that that you see early signs that folks are addressing your needs?
Yeah, I mean, we have a selfless plug here. We got a patent recently, last year, for our implementation of redundant PON for our fiber network. And we have a vendor we worked with, Adtran, to develop a very, very fast failover. So we had a requirement of sub 1 electric cycle, so 15 milliseconds to fail over from one feed to the other. So I think that that's a really, really clear example of how we can work with our vendors to say, and this is not the only example, right, just one that comes to mind, but one to say, hey, let's come to the table together strategically, let's look at this problem the same way, and then it's not just, here's a bunch of requirements from the utility, go meet it, without kind of, including them at the table. So I think that's just an easy example of just trying to find a way that the vendors become part of the grid side planning for development of these pieces of equipment.
Reliability and cybersecurity, those are probably the two biggest differences if we compare to what the carriers need. The carriers, probably one of the questions that product developers ask themselves is, well, how long am I going to be selling this thing for, and how many units am I going to sell? Because as soon as I actually get a decent volume out, they're going to turn around and tell me they're decommissioning their 6G and they're going to 7G. Well, we're still going to be on 4G and 5G. But the good news is it's a different model. And I've had this discussion with a lot of carrier people where they keep, pushing for latest and greatest, and I, especially on the network side. And my answer is, if the customer wants to deploy a device and he doesn't ever want to go back and touch it for at least 10 years, and if you talk to the T&D guys, they probably prefer 15 and 20 and beyond. If that device is never being touched and never changing, then why would you change your network? There's no need to continue to advance your network if the end devices are never changing. So increase reliability, increase cybersecurity, because at the end of the day, your LTE 5G network, it's just a dumb pipe. Whatever you put into it will come out at the end. So you have cybersecurity issues, you're adding all this intelligence, you've got servers in the back that are pulling all this data and doing whatever analysis on the data, but it's a pipe. So how do you secure the device, and how do you prevent tapping into that device? Because that pipe can transmit all the data you want, but it can also transmit spyware, anything else. And the LTE system doesn't know what it's transmitting. It's blind. The control plane is blind to the traffic plane. It just knows there's traffic. So cybersecurity, reliability, with the understanding that these devices ideally won't be touched for at least 10 years.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, it's not reliability and security at the beginning, but you need to have that through the entire life, right? So your configuration tool, your management tool is going to be your conduit to make sure that you're maintaining those high standards all the way through. So I think it's very important to think through in terms of the whole picture.
Not a whole lot to add to that, but I would just second the cybersecurity reliability aspect and skip over that since you covered it pretty well. But there is again an ecosystem there of connectedness, all of which is extremely important, right? I mean, for us, spectrum, back to that reference point, can't be separated from the importance of device deployment and device management and reliability and cybersecurity. For us, at a high level, spectrum represented a strategic investment, and as a utility, strategic capital investment, which is very important, right? But with that, to complete the storyline, was cybersecurity and reliability. And again, situational awareness via those devices. It took all of that to kind of round out the vision of why this made sense and why it will continue to make sense, and not necessarily replacing 4G with 5G with 6G, but getting the model in place, right? Getting the foundation laid to really start pursuing the use cases and the benefits that come with it. And devices are front and center with that, and not necessarily, again, something we have to be constantly aware of, rather, is the potential for regulatory fatigue, right? We could upgrade nonstop with the latest and greatest from a technology and device perspective, but we need to get the foundation laid to establish the benefit that proves out why we're doing this.
That's great. All right, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. I know that utilities are oftentimes fiber rich. Why, and maybe Jimmy, we can start with you, but I'd like to hear from all the panelists as well. In addition to fiber, why are the utilities that you represent also including private wireless as part of your strategy? How do they come together as a overall communications strategy?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of touched on it earlier, right? Like we have this really, really strong foundation that we're continuing to build with a fiber network, right? And we know that, we like to say internally, right, wireless is not fiberless. And so as we build out this fiber network and this fiber infrastructure, naturally you start to think about, well, what else can I reach with private LTE? And so, first I think, incorporating that wireless component into our strategy is kind of just that next natural evolution. It reaches more devices. It could even, and we've kicked around these ideas of, maybe even where we have fiber connected devices, can it fail over to PLTE, right? So you have these sorts of new, unique opportunities that I think are, you don't have it unless you have both. So.
Charles?
Kind of going back to some discussion we've already had, and also one of the first diagrams that LT presented this morning in the keynote comes to mind. But for us, simplistically, right, we're looking at private LTE as a collection mechanism, if you will, out in the field, right? And then fiber as backhaul. Very simple model from that vantage point. But at the same time, again, that model brings with it security, and it brings with it scalability. And, I mentioned the traditional utility earlier. I mean, that even brings in aspects of backhaul, because we have our own traditional microwave network, right, which many utilities have. But again, we're leaning into even further expanding our fiber network as a means of mitigating, I'll say, some of the risk that are there from a microwave perspective. 6 gigahertz recent actions of the FCC, which is a whole topic in and of itself, but all this comes into that ecosystem of communication and networking that I think truly is foundational to the future business model for us as utilities. But it really does, at the end of the day, revolve around fiber and connectedness. But yet, private LTE for us, at least, is an enabler in our service territory, given the demographics and so forth, to help really make that all come together.
Thank you. Patrick?
Your Wi-Fi router at home is kind of useless without the cable modem that hooks you up to the internet, and it's basically, you need the end-to-end solution. Your private LTE is basically a last mile wireless local loop. It provides that last span of your connection, allows you to do it wirelessly. So, think back to your house. You don't have to figure out how to run wire all over the place to your kid's bedroom, your kitchen, your living room. You just turn on your router, and that last mile is very easy to connect to. So it makes it far easier to have a connection to absolutely everything. But then, of course, you need that backhaul so that you can feed the data back and forth.
That's great. Thank you. Charles, you talked about the endpoints and the massive amounts of endpoints, which means massive amounts of data. And I recently saw an interview with you talking about data. What is your vision, and what are the benefits? What can we do with artificial intelligence? And also, what are the risks that you see?
There's a topic in and of itself as well. But, I often talk about, at the end of the day, it's about data, right? Everything we're talking about today, we haven't necessarily touched that word yet, but, situational awareness has a direct dependency on data, right? It's all about the data and the data that comes from those devices that we just talked about, right? And so, you hear different analogies, right, of data being the fuel, if you will, of the future. I think that applies. And it applies to us as utilities, again, for creating that real-time situational awareness in the field that private LTE is instrumental to help enable. But as we go forward, it's data-driven decision-making. It's automated data-driven decision-making, in a lot of cases. But to your point about AI, AI is not without risk. Everybody is still kind of figuring out their way through the most recent generations of AI, being generative AI, right? AI has been around for many years, machine learning and so forth, all about the data going back many, many years. But the most recent, transformative versions of AI, we're still learning, right? We're all still learning, and those come with the most risk right now. And I'm sure that many of you are talking about this with senior leadership on boards and so forth about managing that risk proactively, but yet also defining the opportunities. So it's that balance between defining and leveraging opportunities with managing the risk, right? It's a delicate balance. It's not prescriptive. And you have to think about it each and every day because it's kind of a moving target right now.
Do you all believe that new roles and responsibilities will come with that new technology, or do you think that you can repurpose some of the teams that are already working in the communications field?
Well, I'll add on really quickly. We're really extending what we already have in place, largely. So, we have what I'll call federated data analytics centers of excellence across the company, leveraging skill sets around data science and so forth. And so AI is just a natural extension of that. And that's how we're looking at it, right? And so we're extending the skill sets, if you will, and the awareness and the thinking of those that already focus on data and analytics on a daily basis to now more fully incorporate AI.
Great. Any comments from?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put on my previous hat as like a reliability engineer, right? So when I think about the historical complete lack of data in the industry as it pertains to our assets in the field, you see these really, really awesome solutions come out just to basically help with data quality of the grid assets, right? We used to joke sometimes, like you go out with a field map and it's like, well, I don't even know where this manhole is. I can't even find this pole, right? And am I alone on this? Anyone? No. All right. Okay. Thanks. But using AI and just all those tools, right? It's an extension, kind of like what you said. It allows us to keep making data-driven decisions, but now you can start to plug some of those gaps in the actual data you're using, or at a minimum start to identify these anomalies in the data that you have. So again, it just becomes more insight for us to make these decisions.
Right. I even envision AI being a part of helping you to meet your environmental goals as well, using that data to shut things down, power things back up, depending upon the situation. So, Patrick, it looks like you're gonna.
Yeah, I think AI is the evolution, but from what I see, we're still on the path of developing that data analysis. So, the question is, what can you do with AI, and what do you want to do? I mean, you can collect absolutely anything out there, and you probably don't quite yet understand what you're going to gain in terms of insight into your system. So, I'll pretend to sound like a T&D guy, like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm a wireless guy. But are there patterns in voltage fluctuations that have trends that can alert you that a certain piece of equipment is about to fail? Do you even know? How would you if you're not measuring your voltage and constantly feeding it back to the thousands of nodes that you have out there, so that you gain that intelligence, that you can sort of look back, okay, this device just died. What behavior was it exhibiting? Go back and look at the data. Did others previously? What are the trends? How can you tell in advance? And that's just one example. I'm sure if you sit the T&D guys down and say, what is everything that could possibly be happening on devices that we potentially could monitor? And I think you'd get a lot of answers. So first it's the data collection, then look at your data. What can I even do with all this? What can I find? That's where some data analysts coming in would start to be able to parse that for you, and then you would get better at it and get more advanced. And then at some point where you've learned all that's when you get to AI, where, okay, now we're at the point where we don't even need a human to do this, but it all requires a lot of data, which again goes back to a scalable network.
Well, you just touched on something that I think is very important as we talk about building, and then we start the process of building these networks, the internal engagement and the stakeholder interviewing and getting close to your internal stakeholders. What has that process been like? You mentioned the T&D guys that are going to have a perspective on this. What was that process that you went through in order to get internal stakeholders on board?
Well, I personally haven't. I keep jumping in the 11th hour, ready for the show, and didn't have to do any of the dress rehearsals. But it's definitely a lot of changing mindsets and framing their current situation in a different way. And even the vendors. What I found is the vendors, they're fantastic at making equipment that passes hundreds of thousands of volts through that equipment, and it's reliable. It'll work for 20 years. They're not so good at the smartness of it. You got to look at the Silicon Valley companies, the companies that are used to building intelligence, but they obviously aren't very good at building reliable systems that have massive amounts of voltage running through it. So you got to get the two in the room, and you kind of have to extract that information out from those equipment experts to get them to think in a different way. And a lot of them have a lot of ideas. And then it's the translation to, well, how do you make it economical and practical to deploy and usable? I haven't been involved in those conversations, but that's really, you got to sit them down and get them to focus on it. I don't think those conversations ever
end. I think that as you have the network in place, you find more people within the organization who can find a use for what you're providing and find value in it. And I do want to have both Charles and Jimmy answer that question, but I want to come to Ian real quick because of what Patrick said about having the device manufacturers, the ecosystem itself involved in making sure that you know the requirements and that you can address the massive amounts of data that's going through your devices.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why events like this are so important, right? Because you want that intimacy between utilities and manufacturers, that there's no ambiguity about what the requirements are, and from the other side, we can share what is possible, right? So that utilities can actually get the full benefit, right? Rather than there being a disconnect. So yeah, I think it's absolutely essential to have reliability, scalability, that can deliver for utilities, and it's just very important to keep discussing, between us.
Any comments from Jimmy or Charles about stakeholder engagement and in getting folks internally on board?
Yeah, sure. So I think, well, I kind of mentioned earlier, in Illinois, we passed or not we, but the state passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. As part of that, it required the regulated utilities in the state to move to a multi-year grid plan process. And part of that includes not just, being involved with stakeholders in the planning, but also reaching out into the communities as additional stakeholders and literally just hearing what folks are experiencing. A lot of us, we focus on, these very technical problems, these very technical solutions. A lot of that supports the things that keep the lights on, right? But you have to hear and you have to really listen, to your point, right? Like you have to hear also, it's not just the utility dictating to the manufacturing companies and the vendors, like this is what we shall do. It's a collaborative approach. Likewise, you have to take that and then also combine that with what do customers see? What do customers experience? Do we, are we underestimating some of the ways that we estimate how they experience and utilize everything that we build with the grid, right? So how they're using their energy, how they want to use it, how they would see us as a barrier, and then we take those back and then we use that as part of that collaborative approach with the vendors and the manufacturers.
I'll add on just a little bit. Sitting here thinking, I'll come at it from an internal stakeholder perspective for a second. Thinking back from the past, I know I used to have a title of CIO, now it's CTO. Well, what's the difference? Well, to me, it's that we used to be very traditional, which I associate that with being a CIO, and now as a CTO, being much more progressive and leaning into these future models of automation, just to use that label, right? And so for us internally, I'll go back and use an IT-OT convergence topic for a second, right? That's been around for a very long time, but yet private LTE and devices in the field have done more to help bring together for us the worlds of IT and OT than probably any other thing in recent memory, because of the need to have the urgency and work together to figure out the vision and deploying the vision, again, with urgency, and each playing the roles that we know best from the standpoint of IT and OT, but also adding into that, of course, private LTE and devices and sensors in the field, which has an element of newness to it that's challenging across the board. But again, it's done more to unify, to use that word, us internally, around what in the past have been a tension between models and bringing it into a single working model.
That's excellent perspective. I hadn't heard that perspective before, and it is ringing true in my ears. All right. So I've asked a lot of my questions, but I'd like to turn it over to the audience. You've got a wealth of knowledge up here on the stage. Who's going to go first with questions? Do you want to come?
There are microphones on stands. Yeah, just stand up. John Hughes got one. Yep, you're on.
No.
Hang on a minute.
Okay.
What is the easiest way to convince leadership to go the PLT route when there's some disagreements in terms of if we need it or if we don't need it?
Did y'all hear the question? Okay.
I could say no and have more time to think about it. So for us, I mean, I'll try to repeat the question. Tell me if I do it justice. So it really was around how do you convince leadership to buy into the private LTE model, essentially?
Yes.
I mean, for us, it was a conversation for sure to start there, because we're talking about a significant investment. But again, I'll go back to the fact that it is a significant strategic capital investment. So that begins to form the answer. It's also the enabler. Again, if you zoom out and look at the longer term picture of why you would do it and what it would enable, not just in the near term, but in the long term, right? And then you add the word spectrum into that, right? And you think about it in a bigger picture, having come from a world of telecom. And you have board members typically that are broader than just your own industry for reasons like that, to think broader and think more strategically. And then you start talking about things like business cases, right? And this is one where you may not have an extreme level of precision around the business case, but you've got a directional business case that when you look at it over time makes sense, especially in the world of utilities where you include regulatory models and rate bases and recovery and the operational benefits and the customer benefits, right? So it really was involving, I'll say, essentially all aspects of the company when you think about it that way, into making that decision and that commitment.
I can talk about what we did and how we convinced leadership. So in general, not just PLT, but advanced communications, when we say that, it's the wired and the wireless components of the comm network. But the answer is, for us, it's use cases. The use cases, the benefits that come from use cases, that's what pays for the party. And the connecting of devices, we had to really explain in the beginning, connection of a device is not a use case. The things that the connected device creates and benefits are the use cases. So our DA devices have 10 or 12 different use cases, for example. Offsetting O&M, reducing truck rolls, having faster communication between teamed devices. All these create new use case benefits. So for us, the sum of all of those benefits outweigh the outlay that you invest in your network. So the answer in plain is kind of this is part of our strategy to get the grid to the next level. You have to have the comms to do it. So I'm saying that I'm not leadership, so I had to explain it to our.
I'll even do a little shameless UBBA plug. For those who are new in the planning process, there is a wealth of information on the website for members with regard to use cases. The cost of doing nothing is a great paper that was created a couple of years ago, but still valid and relevant for today. So coming to this conference, participating, all of that helps with the internal I don't want to call them battles, but we got to have our dukes up and be ready to provide the data that leadership needs. John, I know that you had a question.
So I think I got it on. Jimmy touched on a little bit of what I was going to get at. So the network's a foundational enabler for us. It follows our business and it's critical. I think we all get that. But as an organization, and I'm listening to Ian, and this is probably directed at you, are you learning enough about our business to help us drive innovation? Do you know our use cases where you can drive artificial intelligence where it means something, that data gathering? So I have this rock solid network, data solid, but do you understand our use cases and where you can help us grow and evolve? And does this organization have an opportunity to invest more in that area? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we're never going to be as expert on your use case as you are, right? What we can hope to do is work very closely with you, share in these forums, get a great understanding of what you want to try and do. Fundamentally, though, we are an enabler, as Patrick said, right? We are trying to achieve that connectivity with the availability that you require, with the bandwidth that you need at all times, right? And from that, you will have access to the data that you need to, to optimize the operation of your network. So I think that as long as we keep the conversation open in terms of what your requirements are for what we need to do for you, then I don't think the utility industry is in any danger of missing out on those opportunities.
Looks like we have another question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning. What is the role of private LTE and fiber inside the substation and outside the substation? So you talked, Jimmy, a lot about fiber and those two things connected. Where do you see private LTE with respect to protection and control I'd like to hear from each of you.
Yeah, I mean, so we have in the fiber side, right, we have what we call our backbone layer, which is our connecting substation to substation. And then we have what we call a fiber hut or communications hut that houses all of our electronics, co-located most of the time with these substations. From there, we have a connection to the substation, and then it connects to all those various devices. So I think, so to the question about, right, like how does it support the protection, the control, et cetera, within the substation, you know, getting off of legacy comms and onto our fiber network for those protection and control, having those substation to substation connectivity, and then allowing the kind of the network topology to kind of allow the redundancy, allow for that sort of thing. And then the LTE side, I think, is just an extension of that. In my mind, it's are there other sorts of sensors, control, other sorts of things that it would be either cost prohibitive or you just physically cannot reach some of that with fiber. So it's really, again, getting anything onto communications that could be supported, and then it's just making the prudent decision, should this be fiber, should this be wireless?
Similar answer. I'll go back to the word ecosystem, because when I think of fiber and private LTE in the context of substations, right? First of all, there's the definition of a substation, which for us is part of the answer, because not every substation has fiber, right? So every utility, has a similar methodology of prioritizing substations based upon criticality, right? And so we've got fiber to our most critical substations, and then over time maybe that bar continues to lower based upon a variety of variables and factors. Yeah. But then at some point you've got that line that's drawn and you pick up wireless communication to the remaining substations, yeah. Depending on the devices within those substations, right? But again, in an increasing world of automation and sensors and device deployment, everybody's going to be leaning more and more into that in terms of making sure that we have connectivity out into those substations from an operational perspective, so we've got the awareness and we can make that automated, data-driven decision making, right?
Sorry, one follow-up. I just wasn't clear. So are you allowed to use private LTE inside the substation for protection and control? Is that NERC-CIP compliant? Because I'm hearing that inside the substation you're not allowed to have connectivity externally. So how are you solving that particular problem? I think that's my question.
Oh, I see. Yeah, we wouldn't use it for the protection and control specifically, but there are other use cases at the substation that can use LTE. So if we wanted to backhaul video, backhaul sensors, telemetry at the devices, right? The system visibility, even when we have like automated thermal cameras helping to supplement the preventative maintenance cycles, those sorts of things. That to me is the more that stays outside of that, kind of compliance. But then the hardwired is where you kind of keep everything incredibly secure.
NERC-CIP would be one of those variables in prioritizing, right?
Yes.
How you look at your substations and how you treat them from a private or fiber versus private LTE perspective when it comes to connectivity.
Maybe that'll be a future UBBA conference where that
we're always
compliant.
coming up with new topics. We're coming close to wrap. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, we have one more.
So good morning and thank you. I'm Steve Merrill from Itron. I just wondered what your thoughts are on, after you've gotten the approval from management for a private LTE, private network, how do you decide whether to go 4G or 5G, right? And 4G, obviously, there's a very rich ecosystem of devices. As we heard from LT, 5G is still evolving. There's not many devices available. They haven't addressed the low-speed applications yet, and yet you are building networks that are very costly and need to have a longevity in the 20 to 30 year kind of time frame. So really for Patrick and Charles, what advice would you give Jimmy in terms of his journey on his next decision and where to go with those two technologies?
For us, and it's a message that I continue to beat within Edison, is it's completely driven by the devices. So in our case, a lot of that decision is simply a function of what's the cost difference between them. We're going to be deploying potentially 100,000 of these. So what's the cost differential between an LTE device relative to the 5G device? We're still in the RFP and haven't made that final decision on our devices, but the economics of it is a large piece of it. I'm not overly concerned about the longevity of LTE versus the longevity of 5G. It's about, setting up your agreements. Again, if you're never going to touch a device, what does it matter that 20 years from now, 4G is an old technology if your manufacturers for your devices and your LTE system are still supporting the product because you forced them to in your agreement? It is a snapshot in time that's not going to change regardless of what G the carriers are at. You're in your own little ecosystem and you're in your safe bubble where your system is not going to be obsolete. So for us, it's mostly the cost of the devices, not necessarily the functionality of 5G over LTE. You're already buying a Ferrari to go to the grocery store. Do you want a McLaren or do you want a Ferrari? Neither one has a lot of room for the groceries, but that's what you're getting.
Anybody else care to answer?
Snapshot in time, I agree, right? You've got to look at where you're at, what the current capabilities are. For example, if you're considering 4G, how long do you see the capabilities of 4G satisfying those use cases that are on your list, right? You can upgrade on a nonstop basis, right? And all you do is upgrade, but at some point you've got to draw that line in the sand, implement on your view of current technology, understand what the upgrade path looks like, right? And explain that along the way as part of that commitment to making a decision, is understanding your future path, but at the same time getting something done. And getting something done with current technology, with what that means to you, realizing the benefits of that, and then projecting when you'll have an upgrade to perform.
Yeah.
Coming from the manufacturer side, one thing I do want to point out is I know that utilities look at the long term. They look at 10-year, 20-year contracts.
30.
A long time. Our perspective is that you buy the technology that allows you to grow, and from the outset. So whether it's 4G, whether it's 5G, you want the capability to do both from the outset, because none of us have a crystal ball, and you're buying the investment once, you're capitalizing it once. So our perspective is that you buy something that's compatible with both 4 and 5G from the get-go.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, you certainly don't want to be saddled with equipment that has no capacity to be upgraded, but 4G has a lot of life in it, and I think it meets almost all, if not all, of the use cases that are foreseeable. So that I think utilities can invest in confidence in LTE networks.
That's great. Thank you, gentlemen, for the honor of being on the panel. Your insights are wonderful, and I'm sure very well received from the audience. And I myself appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.